So back in May, it is now August, I read Hide by Kiersten White. I actually pre-ordered this book because I had read one other book she has written called The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein. It's a pastiche novel. It's told from Elizabeth Frankenstein's point of view, and it starts out when she and Victor are children, and oh, it is marvelous. Frankenstein is one of my top 3 novels of all time. I absolutely love Frankenstein, and you may or may not know this, but there are actually 2 versions of the book. Both were written by Mary Shelley. The first one was published in 1818, and it is the best version, and that is the version I recommend that you read. And then she rewrote it again and published it again in 1831, and she changed some very important aspects of the book. For example, in the original version, Elizabeth is the cousin of Victor, and they get married. And also, the Frankenstein's monster, the creature, he chooses to do an evil deed because that is what he chooses to do. He has free will, and he made his choice, and he did it. And that's what he did. And in the rewrite that Mary Shelley did and published, she changes Elizabeth from a cousin to a ward, so she's no longer related to Victor. And she also changes the creature, Frankenstein's monster. Instead of his having made a choice out of bitterness and disappointment, she makes it seem like he had no choice, like his own nature drove him to do the bad thing, and that it was not his choice at all, that he was sort of predestined to do this terrible thing. So if you've read Frankenstein, you know what terrible thing I'm talking about. But as The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein is marketed as a young adult, although it does not read like young adult until you get to the ending, actually. I actually didn't like the ending. I don't want to say what that act is. But this book gives an explanation about the differences in the 2 versions, which I thought was extremely cleverly done. This book was marvelous. If you love Frankenstein and you have read it and you remember it, read this. You will love it. Up until the point where Frankenstein's monster does the evil deed, when we get to that point in this book, it kind of falls off the rails after that. I mean, it's okay, but it isn't great after that. But up until that point, which is most of the book, it's only the last bit that covers that portion. Up until that point, it's 5 stars up until that point. So if you haven't read it, definitely recommend it. But at any rate, my point is the reason that I pre-ordered this book is because I read this that she wrote and absolutely fell in love with it. So pre-ordered it and everything. And where The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein was marketed as a young adult, but read adult, this one was marketed as an adult novel. So, and it's a thriller, and I love thrillers. I really like thrillers. So I thought this has to be a hit, right? Wrong. I was very disappointed in how much I did not like this book. Unfortunately, it reads like YA. Marketed as adult, but it is a YA novel. It is definitely YA. I don't really know why they're marketing this as adults, unless it's maybe for some of the gore, but there's really not all that much gore in it. So because it's a thriller, and because probably a lot of people are going to like this, especially if you are a person who enjoys young adult novels, you probably will love this. The premise is absolutely marvelous. It centers around, I believe there are 14 20-somethings. And they all sign up for this contest that takes place in an abandoned theme park. And they're essentially playing a game of hide and seek. And if you get found, then you're out. And of course, the last person found is the winner, and they get a whole bunch of money. So each of these people who join the contest do need money. And that's all and people start dying. Of course, people start dying. So that's all you need to know going into this book if you're going to read it. And I'm not going to say too much about the plot because I just don't want to spoil anything for someone who hasn't read it. And this book is new. This hasn't been out for very long. So I don't want to say too much. However, I will say that I didn't... Oh, I'll say one other thing before I go into my complaints about this book. Is I can tell you one thing that won't spoil it for you. And that is it's based on something in Greek mythology. It's based on something very interesting, I felt, in Greek mythology. Which brings me to the things I did like about this book, which was the premise. I loved the setting and I loved the premise. I thought that was so great and it was such a wonderful idea, marvelous idea for a thriller. Just 5 stars on just that. The execution, however, left a lot to be desired, in my opinion. The characters, there were a whole bunch of characters. There were 14 contestants, I believe, plus a bunch of staff. And you were just, for the first portion of the book, you were just in and out of everybody's head so fast and so often that I had a terrible time keeping track of who was thinking what. I mean, in one paragraph, you were in like 5 or 6 different people's heads. At least I believe that's what it was. Like I said, it was difficult to follow in the beginning, all of the thoughts everyone was having. That does improve as the book goes on. So once you get into the contest itself, that gets a lot better. Let's see. I didn't like any of the characters. None of the characters were likable, in my opinion. I think I was supposed to like a handful of these characters, but I just didn't. I just didn't like them. I didn't think they were interesting. I didn't think they did anything interesting, thought anything interesting. And one character in particular, a male character named Brandon, seemed very childish to me. He seemed extremely immature, and he said a lot of really sort of simple and silly things like, you know, I have to be the best friend I can be, you know, things like an 8-year-old would say. And as far as I could tell, he wasn't supposed to have any sort of developmental disability. But he did read like somebody who had a developmental disability. But that wasn't being stated. So, I don't know. I just thought that was very strange. Didn't like the characters. Hated the ending. We got to the end of the book and I had not very many answers at all to this conclusion. It didn't really conclude. I'm sure she's setting this up to be a trilogy. She has written several trilogies, or at least 3 trilogies that I can think of that I have not yet read. So this is probably being set up to be a trilogy, or at least a duology, because she did leave that too open-ended to be the end. And I didn't like what happened at the end. I hated what happened at the end. So what I did like about it, and one thing that happened here that I did like was this isn't spoiling anything, there is a book that belongs to the townspeople and it's been lost, and they find it in this amusement park and they read it, and that was very interesting. In fact, if the story had been about that book they found, this would have been a much more interesting book, in my opinion. I would have loved to have read that book and about those people. So yeah, I was pretty disappointed in this book. And you know what? I have been real good about doing some videos today, which I'm really proud of myself because I hardly ever get in the mood to do videos anymore. And I've done 4. I've talked about 4 of the books I've read this year. To be honest, I have had kind of a stinky year with books. I have not read very many books that I've liked. Most of the books I've read this year, I really haven't liked that much. And as a result, I've only read 31 books, and it's August already. So, but this month is Book Trek, and so I'm hoping that my reading will be reinvigorated by Star Trek books. So really, that's pretty much my 2 cents on this book, or at least all that I can say without giving away any spoilers. So I'll call that the end of the video.